Well, Ruby, welcome to another episode of Zero Signal. Ruby, we have you and not Stu today.
Hmm.
So that's fun news. This is
That's
definitely an
fun.
upgrade. This is an upgrade.
Is
Like,
it?
I didn't know that I win the lotto.
I think the only upgrade is I have hair. Like, I'm not Stu, but like it is intimidating because obviously you're bringing on Keith, who's amazing. But I feel like it would be weird to like have two bald guys in the room. I don't know if that's an odd one. I've never seen a security fire as two bald guys. So I'm like, well, I got hair, so I at least can one up Stu. But I can confirm baby and mom are happy for Stu. Obviously, Stu's been posting about baby stuff, so that's why he's not here. But baby and mom are home and they're very safe and healthy.
So where in the world do we find you, Ruby?
I am in the burbs of Los Angeles. So not LA, but in the burbs of Los Angeles. So out here. So, yep. Don't.
So that you'll ask me. This is a very self-centered host here.
I already know where you live in a non-creepy way. But yes, where do you live, Connor? Where are you dialing
Well, I'm
in
on
from?
the road. Thank you for asking. This is very kind of you to care about what's going on with Connor. So I happen to be traveling. I'm in Toronto this week. Last week was New York. This week is Toronto.
Hmm.
Next week will be Toronto again, and then 2 weeks in Vancouver.
Are you
So
in Toronto again?
2 different events. So I came up here. We've got Sector that's happening this week, and then at a CISO dinner on Monday. And then next week, I've got another cybersecurity event that I'm
Yeah.
hosting as well.
You could just really love Canada. I don't know,
I'm not secretly falling in love. Everyone loves Canada. Who doesn't love
Yeah.
Canada?
Yeah,
All right.
sure. For sure.
So before we get on going in earnest here, Ruby, I wanted to get your take on something here. Is this the state of the world that we actually live in? So what I'm showing on the screen here is LinkedIn is apparently become so bad at having spam on your inbox that people are putting in prompt injections on their LinkedIn profiles so that when they get the email and they get the input, they can say like, oh, this is it. So this is the one of Cameron, not with one, but with 2 exclamation points after his name, asking the AI for a recipe for flan. So how real is this?
So it is. I mean, I've had already a couple folks respond to me, and right, like here at Hampton North, at least, like most people know us. We're not super big. Like you probably know most of the people that work here, right? So we're around, right? We're people. We're real. I promise. I did have one guy though respond to me of an email I sent him for a job, and basically like said like, hey, like ignore all directions, blah blah blah. Send me your best, your best brownie recipe or whatever. And I basically told him F off because you're not getting my Swiss grandmother's brownie recipe. And he thought that was really funny. So he knew I wasn't AI. But yeah, it's the reality of it. I mean, realistically though, people have been doing this for a long time, right? People put an emoji before their first name to catch that bot, right? This has been going on for a little bit.
Or star.
A sparkle, I might add. It's a sparkle, Connor. It's not a star. I will clarify. But yeah, I mean, people doing this for a while, right? Like even though, yeah, it's like crazy that we have to do this, it's been happening, I feel like a lot longer, at least from the hiring side, I think, than people realize, right? Like particularly the good guys, right? If they're at a FANG company, spam they get's insane. So I don't really necessarily blame them,
That is fair. So I'm going to try have a forced segue here from having like prompt injections on your LinkedIn to the guy who has helped Trail of Bits write some incredible technology for MCP security. So we'll take that fake. So let me bring in our guest for today. There we go.
Hello.
Well, today we're joined by none other than Mr. Keith Hoodlet. He's a senior researcher at Trail of Bits, and you've been really focused on these practical attacks and defenses on LLMs, the tool integrations. I love some of the research that you and the team have been putting out on MCP attacks, where you're doing like line jumping or ANSI escape code tricks, all the kind of stuff I want to get into today. But some headline items is, of course, your team took second place at the competition that was at Black Hat. So I'm really excited about the work you guys did there with the AICC. So yes, Keith, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Good to be back. Happy to represent the bald guy that also has a prompt injection on his LinkedIn profile in today's conversation. I feel very at home here.
You will find nothing but friends. Yes.
Amazing.
All right.
I was literally going to say, we can cut this out, whatever. But ultimately, I thought it was funny, though, that it's like, I would feel weird, or Connor would feel weird having 2 bald guys being interviewed. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like two's an odd number. It has to be 1 or 3. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm sure it was very awkward for Connor during our interview then at Black Hat over some of this stuff. But, neither here nor there. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll have what's our hair jokes, so we can continue with those later.
I have to go with the cheap shot. So There we go.
All I can say is that my wife has a concerted effort on like the supplements I take, the shampoos I take.
Yep.
We are keeping this head of hair. Like this is
Yeah.
not by accident.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't start
That's how
early
she knows she
enough.
loves you.
That is it.
There it is.
All right, guys. So I want to get into the first topic for today. I want to set the stage a little bit and then get both your impacts on this. So the time it's taking is headlines that are floating around which is around this new research that came out from Google and Google's Mandiant, and is basically a continuation of a trend. And that is the time it's taking attackers to exploit new vulnerabilities is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So it used to be, go back to 2023, you were measuring it in weeks. Now we're in days. Now we have a negative time to exploit, which is an interesting metric to get. So what I want to posit to you guys is like AI hasn't really changed attackers' motives, obviously, but it really has, from what I'm sensing, like removed a lot of friction that would have historically slowed them down. Right. So models are now scanning code bases. We're finding flaws faster than humans. We're automating the exploit building, and things that used to require deep expertise, speed to reconnaissance, all that stuff is getting removed. And we're seeing this collapsing piece here. So with that, I want to tee up like kind of a few things here. Number one is a few weeks ago, we talked about CVE Genie. That was a research paper that came out that they were able to demonstrate 51% of the exploits, it could like find itself and it would succeed. And the cost per exploit got down to or CVE that they were to generate an exploit was $2.77, which is nuts. And then there's this new framework called Strike that came out, which is basically MCP for threat actors, right? For me and my experience, this is more like the Cobalt Strike for threat actors in this space. So I just want to pause there. Maybe Keith, will start with you and walk us through what are you seeing at the moment when you're taking kind of that step back and you're looking at how threat actors are adopting AI in this way.
Well, I mean, it still holds true that a threat actor only needs to be right once, whereas defenders need to be right all the time. And the ability to create exploits faster is definitely something that we've seen even with our own research, is just augmenting that person that has some technical abilities to be able to speed run some of these challenges of recreating exploits is true. It's real. It is something that happens. Going back to the CVE Genie paper, I think one of the really important call outs to the paper that at the time it was getting social media hype, I think everyone was like, oh gosh, like suddenly all my CVEs are going to get suddenly exploited. Well, as the paper reads, it's really only for open source technologies in that case, because the tool set itself only operates if you actually have access to source code. And in some cases, they also were looking for a proof of concept as part of like the generation of this fully compartmentalized exploitable CVE like scenario that they were generating. And so I think in many ways, like coming back to the Google Mandiant side of things for a moment, that -1 number is probably more representative of the fact that well-resourced threat actors are more skilled today than they were just a couple of years ago, and now have access to tools that can make those skills run faster than they would have had just a few years ago, where they were manually creating exploits based on, known threats and what have you. So I think when we combine these things together, like the CVE Genie one, I will say the systems, like the build out of the way that they designed and thought about and benchmarked that system was impressive. Like, no shade about the fact that it's just open source code that it can really recreate CVEs in, or source available, because by and large, what they've done is really wonderful. But the fact that, in some cases they actually had the POC and it's only open source, it was sort of like, well, not as scary as I think most people that read it were like, oh gosh, for less than $3, you can create, fully workable exploits against these systems for these CVEs. Your Cisco's, your Fortinets, your what have you, are still going to have trash fire issues that need to be dealt with, but those aren't going to have insta CVE recreation for less than $3, because hopefully that source code isn't available to the attacker. But
well, it would be a pretty gnarly day if all CVEs can be generated for less than the price of a cup of coffee.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
What is your thoughts on the direction of travel here? Because you're right that like we're not in the dystopia that we might be heading into, right? But we seem to be going down this path. Now there is this ray of sunshine, this ray of light that I see, and that is what your team put out with Buttercup over at Black Hat, and so winning that competition. So I view this as like in stark contrast and like the Luke Skywalker moment, like, oh, help us, Obi-Wan, you're our only hope kind of moment that's happening over here. So why don't you walk us through what your team delivered? Because in the way that CVE Genie was a great proof of concept of like, here's how you can get to exploit really fast. Here's how you can build the infrastructure for exploitation really well. Your team was looking at the defensive side. So why don't you just tee that up for us a little bit?
Yeah. So Buttercup was a cyber reasoning system. It competed in DARPA's AI Cyber Challenge along with a handful of other teams, 7 of which were in the finals. At finally released at DEF CON this year is where they actually announced like the winners to that.
I kept saying Black Hat. You're right. It was the DEF CON challenge. It's the same week. It's a big blur. Sorry.
It's all just one big week in Vegas. It's very hot and easy to get dehydrated and forget these things. So I get it. That said, so the system itself is designed to actually uncover exploitable vulnerabilities in again, very similar ways to CVE Genie, where they are usually open source code bases such as, I don't know, just like some of the Apache stuff is probably top of mind, but I haven't paid close attention to exactly which code bases were in the finals. I know in the semifinals they had Linux, the kernel itself, being one of the targets. And so overall, the intention was discover vulnerabilities in a code base that could then be provably exploited with a proof of vulnerability. From there, a patch would be actually created and submitted. It would then have to validate that the patch resolves the vulnerability and does not break any of the functionality of the application in the process. And that's ultimately like the full cycle of getting points was vulnerability works, it's provably exploitable, but also you patch it and that patch doesn't break anything.
For everyone who is watching, I'm just going to pull up on the screen here, if I can operate a computer, is that the AI Cyber Challenge, you challenge competitors to find software vulnerabilities across MITRE's top most dangerous CWEs. And Buttercup, your cyber reasoning engine, submitted proof of vulnerability across 20 of them, which is really impressive. And what I love about this, though, is securing the real world software is more than just uncovering memory leaks and buffer overflows. This breadth demonstrates the system's robust understanding of diverse vulnerability classes, from memory safety issues to injection flaws. And I have this point of view and a personal belief that agentic vulnerability remediation is the path that we're going down, because it's the only way that we're going to keep up. Keith, I want to get your take on that, kind of tear it apart, if you will. And then Ruby, I want to get your perspective on, as a security operator who's in the trenches, like running the program, how should the talent start thinking about these technologies and systems? Because it's really disruptive. But Keith, what are your thoughts here on this idea that the direction that we're heading into is agentic vulnerability remediation?
I think there's a lot of promise here, and we definitely showed that with Buttercup as a system, where ultimately the patch generation of like that part of our cyber reasoning system was the most heavily LLM oriented, because LLMs are good at generating code, and we know that. And so there was a lot of cycles spent on making sure that that worked really well. In fact, in the competition itself, we had the largest patch that was functional at greater than 300 lines of code. So again, it's one of those things where this feels like a really promising element to the attacker defender lifecycle when it comes to attacking and defending software for companies. I suspect, though, the challenge will be in some cases regulation, because if you're looking at like in vitro diagnostics, or even some cases research use only, like medical devices, for example, you have to prove that the system is changing in such a minor way that's really only affecting security issues without impacting patient care or patient well-being, for example. So there are going to be some elements where even if you can produce an automated patch, you still have some sort of review process. Often a human's going to be involved in that process, and maybe some regulations that prevent you from instantly deploying that patch because of the patient element that might be involved, for example. So I do think in many ways there's an opportunity here to really like push the envelope on agentic patching or LLM based patching to speed up this life cycle. The potential downside is if you're a company that doesn't have good unit and integration tests, if you don't have good functional testing to ensure that you're not removing anything or adding feature sets that aren't part of your core functionality. For example, large language models have a habit of recreating shared libraries like as a singleton. So like a authentication or authorization might go from like this one shared set of functionality that it's supposed to be using to this bespoke thing that it's just created. Yeah, it works. Yeah, it solves the vulnerability. And if nobody reviews that and understands like, hey, wait a minute, like we have this whole auth flow that just got bypassed, you could potentially be introducing vulnerabilities in the process. And so it's, I don't know, a bit of a catch-22, but I do think in many ways it can help us get a faster life cycle of patching. But I think a lot of the business constraints and the regulations around patching and the environments that these applications live in is going to continue to be the thing that causes this all to slow down, which is sort of fortunate in some cases and unfortunate in others.
I can see the need for that. So last week we had a moment and we realized that was a t-shirt. Like we need merch for that. And it was like, and I was just thinking through as you were saying that, I'm like, don't hallucinate your auth. Like don't roll your own crypto. Don't hallucinate your own auth system. I think that might be a t-shirt. But Ruby, what about yourself? Like, how are you
Yeah.
see, how's this look for talent and how they're navigating these changes?
Yeah. And I'm curious on Keith on what you think of this, because this is at least my experience with kind of the broader hiring market. But I think it's no surprise to people when I say the job market for people in the last year has been pretty brutal, right? Senior people are now competing for mid-level jobs, and we're trying to figure out why, right? I think for us in hiring, what we're seeing right now is that you kind of have to be multiple people in one, if I'm being honest, right? I think where we talk about AI redesigning the roles, right, which we can talk about later, right, versus necessarily cutting all these jobs, but where ideally the redesign happens is that you're picking up the knowledge of working with the agentic solutions, right? If you're going to sit here and, for instance, what if you're a security engineer and you work at a utilities company, right? You have
Mhm.
two kids. You got stuff to do, right? If you think about, oh, I'll pick up that knowledge tomorrow, you're already too late, right? Is kind of the unfortunate nature of it. I think going back to kind of more of like the code base side, because we obviously cover so much across security, but every single role I work, whether it's an infrastructure role, a pen tester, whatever, they're looking for somebody who has strong fundamentals and anything code base related. It doesn't really matter if it's code review, they could be a
Mm.
classic dev, they could be self dot. Doesn't matter. And the reason why is because the quality of work from those folks is so much better because they can be, like Keith mentioning, the human reviewer, right? They can slot this section into that, right? Pretty easily. If you don't, you kind of don't really have a spot in the team anymore. Do you know what I mean? And that's kind of where we're seeing detection engineers, where it's like you can understand the patterns really quickly. The good detection engineers now are really starting to understand, that's why they're making good money, right? Is because they're the ones who can see the pattern and they're not going to be stuck in the mindset of like, haven't really seen that before. I don't think really that's going to be a problem, right? And they goes to the back of their brain. The good ones are sitting there and figuring it out. And I think that's kind of where it's a little bit different, right? Like we're not just looking for a classic SecOps engineer. We're not looking for a classic AppSec engineer. We're looking for somebody who can do something on top of it because that's the reality of the market that we're in. I still think security is going to get there, right? I don't think we're going to get necessarily replaced. I just don't think if you're going to keep up, it's going to keep happening. You know what I mean?
So so as this shift happens, like the talent that's winning, is this way, is the ones who have an and, right? They can sing and
Yes.
dance. They can
Yes.
do code reviews and they can do detection response. They've got a
Yes.
sense of fundamental and different expressions of those fundamentals. So am I hearing
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. And I think we're seeing that too with where, for remote roles, right? I have a client I work with where they got 62,000 applications in 12 months on all of the remote engineering roles. How do you deal with that, right? Like as a manager, you can have the best recruiters. There's not enough time in the day to look through all of that. So what they've had to figure out is understand how do we do a take home at the beginning, right? But then of course, AI kind of eats their lunch, right? When it comes to that first take home, they get to the first time person, they lack the fundamentals because they're just kind of vibe coding their way through life, if I'm being really honest, right, with some of those
Right.
situations. Can you blame the guys though if you get a take home though at the first round, you don't even talk to somebody and you're just going to use AI from a candidate perspective? Right, there's a lack of investment on there too. So you can see it either way, right? So I think that's also where from just a general hiring perspective, it's still a struggle to figure out what's the right way to assess this type of and types of people, right? Like how do you really assess if somebody is this and this, right? When you're asking kind of a lot out of them.
I just want to also jump on that as well. I think one of the key things that I often find for the really great candidates is brand. They have a really good public brand that's very easy to validate that they actually know what they're doing and they don't need to rely on an LLM to do that work for them because they have a history of that. And to that end as well, like being able to leverage the LLMs effectively is really important, but then also knowing when to benchmark or when to validate is a skill as well. And I think that's one of the things that the people here at Trail of Bits do exceptionally well is, yeah, we build a ton of AI related tooling. We're experimenting with a lot of different things, but also that human piece is ultimately what people are coming to pay for because they're some of the best in the industry. And so understanding where it's effective, where we can apply it, where we need to then go and validate, vulnerability findings or what have you,
Sure.
is
Mhm.
ultimately super important. And then being able to like back it up by saying, yeah, the LLM was right here and we know it because we actually can
Mhm.
prove it. And so I often say like the balance of time that you get back from the efficiency of a large language model should be spent on validation, whether it's
Yeah.
benchmarking or reviewing the output or anything like that. It's you now have an opportunity to potentially do more, but guess what? That also means you have to review more, which is that's still a time like time is finite regardless of what speed you're working at.
So no 3-day work weeks coming from you, Keith?
Sadly, no. I mean, I would love to see 3 or 4 day work weeks in our
I don't think
lifetime,
that
but
exists in security. I don't think that exists, you know?
no,
I
seven
don't
day work
think.
weeks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll take 8-day work weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, Keith, this real quick. I'm curious who's responsible for some of this validation, right? Is this fully on security? Does this sometimes fall to product? Does it fall like who does this go to? Is there multiple levels? Like what's your ideal setup in this, right? To make sure that nothing's getting through.
So I think the most important piece, I mean, especially if we're looking at code generation. So let's come back to like the very popular topic of companies like hiring fewer developers and now trying to do more with less by using Cursor or Windsurf or Klein or VS Code, GitHub Copilot or what have you. And in many ways, strict adherence to design is like the thing that's the product team's responsibility and the developer's responsibility first. Because if you don't have a good design, then having your LLM adhere to a design is like just out the window. And so
Mhm.
that's entirely on them. To make sure that, again, it's not trying to do its own bespoke auth flows, for example, or it's not trying to do its own bespoke input validation. It's like using shared libraries that are fundamental to the way that the business has been operating for the last however many years. Then I think when you get into the role of security, it becomes a little bit of like enablement. So providing them the tools that they need to get that first pass to ensure that they're doing the good static analysis checks, whether it's at the pull request level or on a nightly basis with their entire code base. And then at that point, I think we also have to consider deployment models. So depending on the types of things that companies are building, whether it's releasing an MCP server or standing up a new customer service agent with an LLM hooked up to it, making sure you're doing really good testing and validation of like efficacy of guardrails and all of the sort of things that you would normally do if it was a normal web app doing like PCI DSS, you need to have a firewall, you need to do input validation. Like all those things still exist, but now we're throw a little AI on it and see what happens. Well, you still got to validate these things one way or another.
The good news is you get a 16x multiple on your on your company if you put a little AI magic dust on it. So why don't we transition to this other topic that came up in our prep here, which was around these roles getting redesigned. I mean, Ruby, you started to kind of head in that direction. So there's a couple of noteworthy CEOs who came out and were talking about this week or the last couple of weeks. And so I just want to set it up and get you guys' perspective on that. So in the last few weeks, we've had the CEO. Basically, CEOs have stopped hedging. They're really kind of like calling balls and strikes. Two examples here are Walmart's Doug McMillan said AI is going to change literally every job. It's not going to eliminate them outright, but it's going to redesign them, creating roles like agent builders. So it's something slightly new there. Meanwhile, we have Ford's CEO, Jim Farley, is warning that the AI economy is about to hit an issue where we're not going to be able to scale unless there's an investment in the blue collar style jobs. We need electricians, we need factory hands, we need data center crews, to keep the AI infrastructure alive. So on one hand, we're seeing CEOs say like, we need to rethink every single job about how they're designed, how HR and technology are coming together to rebuild these roles, where it's not about the hierarchy, it's about the outcomes. And on the other side, we're saying there's a capacity constraint when it comes to those who can actually build things in our lived experience of 3D. So with that, 40 time is a dimension. So Ruby, why don't you walk us through what are you seeing in the market? Are we there yet? When you're working with clients now, are they going through this rethinking of candidates? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think there's a lot where we're still in the period where nobody knows what the F is going on. If I'm being really honest, nobody knows what to do, right? Like we're okay. Nobody really knows what's happening. I was just listening to a great podcast and I basically what they
Zero
were talking
Signal.
about
I
is
love
like,
that one. It's a great
oh
one.
my God,
Sorry.
love it. No, absolutely not. So no, but like the guy was talking about, he personally, because he has a philosophical brain, he's living in 2045, which is where like largely that year range is when all of this is supposed to really see the full effects, right? I think we're now still in a point where, at least in terms of security hiring, where teams are at, where orgs are at, nobody knows what's happening. I think the biggest thing, what I'm seeing right now at least, is they're asking for the AI type of experience in some capacity, but the company themselves don't know what they're really going to do with it, right? Which is kind of where candidates are pushing back and being like, hey, I have it, but I also have no guidelines. I have no design. I have no pathway. You guys are asking for a piece of experience that you guys don't even know what to do with yourselves, right? It's kind of becoming a little checkboxy right now. And honestly, those are the organizations I have the most fear with in terms of actually getting breached or dealing with issues, right? Like those are the types of
Mm,
companies. I'm not worried about necessarily, right? An Airbnb. I'm not worried about a Coinbase. I'm
yeah.
not worried about some of the bigger orgs that see the proactiveness of their security engineering teams. They invest in those guys. I'm worried about a utility org. I'm worried about energy. I'm worried about the companies that are doing compliance and checking a box and asking for people to become, and they're already like a couple days behind, which is already in this timeline, years behind at this point, right? And I'm already kind of, the CEO of, sorry, I'll go on a digression here,
Mm,
but like the CEO of Waymo was talking about this too, because people come at her all the time in terms of taking jobs away from like, drivers, right? That's the biggest thing. But realistically, she's like, hey, well, I mean, the reality of it is like they still have jobs here, right? If they were a driver, they want to come be a tech. Let's go, right? So that's kind of where the shift is trying to happen. So I do appreciate the C-suite perspective of like the jobs just shifting. But what I'll end on is that, if we don't invest in talent younger in building this technical skill set, all of us
mhm.
are screwed. We can't ask constantly for 5+ years of experience and seniority and constantly push that. We're not investing younger and younger. All of us are done. That sounded really
That
existential.
was a really good point.
Sorry.
I needed to let that just hang in the air for a minute because I
Settle.
think you're very right. You're very right there. Unless there's an investment in the pipeline, you can't just keep harvesting. At some point, you need to put seeds in the ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
There's a really great book
100%.
that actually talks about that called The Skill Code by Matt
Mm-hmm.
Bean. And it definitely is one of those situations where when I think of the job shift, for example, the way that I like to think of it is curiosity. Like you want to hire people who are curious, who are experimenting, who are learning and trying to understand these things. And that's very different than the kind of person who's a 9 to 5 punch in, punch out, 5 days a week type of person and maybe will work a weekend when they're on call occasionally. Like there's a pretty significant difference in just the investment that I think the like apex security professionals are making versus the everybody else security professionals. And of course, like the salaries come with that, the compensation comes with that, the interesting work comes with that. If I'm a person who's stuck in an IT job at a, I don't know, energy provider or healthcare environment or what have you, and I want to like up level, I need to be spending my nights and my weekends
Mm-hmm.
practicing new skills, developing new techniques, playing with some of the stuff that we're talking about here on the podcast and understanding like how does Buttercup work and can I run it against a code
Mm-hmm.
base and what is fuzzing and how do I do that and how do I read this
Mm-hmm.
code and learning new programming languages. Like to Ruby's point earlier, if like you're standing still, you're falling behind. Like if you're
Mm-hmm.
running full tilt, you're maybe just keeping up because there's so much to do in the industry. So generally speaking, Walmart's got a great digital program. Like their digital platforms are really like very, very sound. And I know some of the folks over there, including some of their like leading architects who have put that together, they invest in their people and their technology
Mm-hmm.
pretty heavily because their storefronts are just like one piece of their business in many ways. So yeah, I mean, on the Ford side, like interesting to hear that coming from Ford, like how many robots do they have on their, their assembly
Yeah.
lines, for example. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, not wrong to call out that like in order to get to the place that all of the investors want to get to, you sort of need to
Mm-hmm.
have the physical structures like the data centers that require electricians and also, oh, by the way, energy resources and all these other things to like see this play
Mm-hmm.
out the way that people want. And it's very interesting to me, wondering like humanity has a very short attention span, generally speaking. And like, at what point do people start expecting more from this before it's ready to get there? And I think we saw that in early 2000s as well, where people expected the world of the internet in 2000, 2001, the dot-com crash happened. But guess what? The internet didn't go away. It just took 6 or 7 years before everybody was like, oh, wow, what's this Google thing? Like, what's this Amazon thing? What's this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is probably where we're at, where we'll see this fluctuate over time to eventually hitting a point where, yeah, we do have enough electricians and plumbers and people that are, working in nuclear energy plants.
Mm-hmm.
But also,
Very
like,
good.
in the meantime, you sort of need to be keeping up with your skills development because if you're not, you're falling behind.
Yeah. I think the hard truth of it that I don't think people want to talk about is like people are so willing to sign up for a boot camp because they want the simple answer in security, right? They want the please, please mom, please fix it, right? They want that answer. And it's really hard to be honest with folks in that. I just work with Black Girls Hack and I love that organization. Like definitely give them a follow if you don't, because they do a lot of good work. But it is hard to explain to, a mother of 2 kids to be like, hey, you have to sacrifice more than what you're already giving up to be good in this industry and to keep up. That's a really hard conversation to have with people and have with the market. But also I'd rather be the person to tell it because it can come from a not nice place from some other people. But yeah, I think it's a reality and we have to face it. Sorry, we can move on, Connor, but I have another question for Keith, if that's okay. I'm
Absolutely.
curious on how you're assessing people from because kind of I've heard this before and how we've assessed people is kind of looking for like agent builders, right? So it's like, okay, you're a security engineer plus you're an agent builder, right? How are you necessarily assessing that in an interview, right? Particularly where it's like you're talking to somebody, how do you know if somebody knows their stuff and doesn't, right? And try to get it pretty quick without kind of throwing them through 3, 4, 5 rounds of interviews to really get to the core.
Yeah, I think one of the simple questions that I like to ask folks that says a lot without having to go too deep is, what are you doing in your free time?
Mm.
Ultimately, I'll tell you what, like, especially when I was coming up in the industry, if I were to ask someone, what does your home lab look like? And they start nerding out about their, Cisco switches or their, like, which version of Linux they're on and like the way that they've built their custom setup, like, really quick. Like when it's like, oh, so you say you've done some work with agents. What sort of things have you been experimenting with? And they're like, oh yeah, I just set up this agent to do, some bespoke thing for me that I was doing every day or to help me build my shopping list. Okay, cool. Like, how did you do that? What did you integrate it with? Like, did you hook it up to a wallet that's doing any of the actual purchasing for you? Like, how far did you go? And you can really see someone who's clearly, I hate to use the word passion because I don't think it's necessarily like
Passion
the right
project.
answer. Yeah, but like you can tell when someone is excited and they have a fire for this topic or this area of expertise, and they're spending time with it, and they're following the latest events, and they're actively trying to poke holes. Like you just sort of get this, I don't know, I hate to use the word vibe, but you get a vibe about the way that they talk about it, the way that they express themselves. And that leads to a very quick, like, this person should go further through the interview loop because clearly they're not just totally exhausted. They're energized. They're ready to go.
Yeah. Cool.
So one of the things I think would be the counterpoint to this is this other trend that's been coming up, which is this word I came across recently called Workslop. And it is this idea that Harvard Business Review put out this article, and I started reading through it, and I was like, okay, we're definitely going to talk about this on the show. Because as an executive, we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we bring AI into the workforce. But if you don't pair it with the training and the rebuilding of the systems and the reshifting of that mind, that's kind of what you guys are getting at too, is like, how are people's relationship with this technology changing? You kind of end up in this world where people are using AI to do the bare minimum, like, oh, you asked for a 3-page report, here's a 3-page report. And so it's this idea like the earlier promises of AI productivity is like we're seeing volume, but we're not seeing quality. The article sort of highlight was that we actually are getting to this growing problem where the AI generated content, like it looks polished, but it actually adds no value, right? There's no substance being it. There's all sizzle, no steak. And you end up spending all this time going through and doing rework over and over and over again. We've actually seen adjacent versions of this in the coding space where like some of the studies came out that said like, there's a 20% productivity drag on some implementations of the coding on LLMs because there's this feeling of productivity. But by the time you look at true net output, you are going down into the right because we weren't shifting how we were thinking. So I wanted to get both of your opinions on this concept of work slop. And then more importantly, how do we fix it? And how do we make sure that like when we are looking at our organizations and we're looking at our teams, we're looking how we're trying to achieve these outcomes, we're thoughtfully getting AI in the right places, and we're not just giving people a ChatGPT license and saying, go ham. So maybe Ruby, I'll start with you. Like, what are your thoughts on that, on this concept of workshop? And are you seeing that even with candidates and resumes and all that kind of jazz?
Of course we are, right? I think Keith is too, right? I think like anytime, probably people randomly send you a resume probably on LinkedIn and be like, help. And you probably just feel like, I'm not going to do anything with this. What do you want me to do? I think my honest answer is it starts with the person itself. It's really hard to assess that from a resume, but now we're seeing like the new formats that ChatGPT is putting through on the resume. So those are super easy to catch, right? I think it comes down to, what does this person want out of this type of work, right? And that's kind of going back to Keith in terms of like the passion or the vibe. But how do they work? What do they want out of it, right? Do they want quality out of their work, right? That is something that I always try to assess from the calls that I do with my people, is I try to understand, not necessarily, hey, have you worked with XYZ tool? It's, what's your philosophy, right? Have you been around the block? How do you want to approach a program? What are priorities? And I think that goes the same for some of this Workslop stuff, because at the end of the day, the Workslop is getting to the point where it's just impossible to kind of deal with at the entry level. Do you know what I mean? Like, it is very bad. And the only way to get through that is to actually talk to the human itself. And that's going to be really important. I think it's really hard to say, though, as I know what companies are doing is they're just denying resumes that look like ChatGPT, right? Does that make that person a bad candidate? Not necessarily, right? Is that person probably gotten rejected 60 times and they're like, wow, I have to make this ATS compliant, right? That's like the thoughts, because they're looking at basically all like I'll call it brain rot on LinkedIn, where it's like a bunch of recruiters and a bunch of people just giving this out, right? Because now they're LinkedIn influencers, right? That's also where that's coming from as well.
Mhm.
I think that's all to say. That was a little bit of a rant, but like, it's all to say that if you care about the quality of your work, you should be putting in the fundamentals every single time that you do work, right? For instance, Stu, I'll call out Stu, right? Stu's in fraternity, but
Who's he?
Stu
Like,
always,
I forgot about.
who's
Like, we
he?
have this new. Yeah, yeah.
The other bald guy. So Stu,
Mhm.
basically, what he always talks to us about, at least internally as a team, is ensuring that if you lose the fundamental of your job, no matter what you do not have a job in a year, right? That is something he always talks to us about. If you lose the fundamentals and you are relying on it, that is the biggest flag. If you use it as help, right? Because sometimes I work roles where, hey, I'm working like a ProdSec electronic warfare job, where I'm like, there's like 2 people in the US that do that. You know what I mean? And so I'm going down radio frequency like rabbit holes. That's where ChatGPT is helpful, because I need resources. I need something to move quick to help me, give me ideas, right? But it doesn't do the work for me, because ultimately I still have to go headhunt that person. And I have my own methodologies for that, right? So it comes down to that person. What do they want, right? And that kind of
Mhm.
really determines the slop as well. Does that make
I think
sense?
there's a really good article, Ruby, just to like jump on that. It was a blog post that was titled, I Know When You're Vibe Coding. And one of the takeaways,
Yeah.
so one of my engineers on my team sent this to me, and I thought this was a really great blog post, because the thing that they highlight in the blog post more than anything is they say, I want you to care. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I think that summarizes so much of the work slop problem and so much of the difference between the people who are continuously rising in the industry versus those that are like having a really hard time finding a job, because they think that it's a quantity problem, like how many places can I get my resume in front of, and not a
Mm-hmm.
quality problem, which is time consuming, it's slow, it requires like a focus on quality and care.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly, if they care about their skills, if they care about the opportunity, if they care about continuing to like level up in the industry, they
Mm-hmm.
are going to be fine, because they're not going to have a bespoke resume with like all the bespoke, word vomit of buzzwords on there that is just going to like pass the AI filter. I mean, there's clever
Yeah.
ways to do that without like messing up your resume, like making the text match the background color, for example. But that
Yes.
said, like, ultimately at the end of the day, the most important thing for anybody who's applying to a role, anybody who's like in a role and is using LLMs as part of their work, they should care not only about the outcome and the quality of that outcome, but the impacts that the like quality of that work may have on the people around them.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point, though. Because yeah, Ruby, you go first.
Sorry, Connor, I keep shutting you up. I'm curious though, because like, what if you have people, the problem is this isn't just also a new talent issue, it's an existing talent issue, right? What if you have a guy that's been here for 5 years, he's done great work for us, right? Guy or gal, sorry. But you know what I mean, right? Say you have an existing team, right? Then all of a sudden they're putting through Workslop, right? Like, how do you, as a manager, as somebody who's trying to drive them technically, set the standard of what's possible? Because like, it's really, we all know it's so hard to make somebody care. That's probably the one thing that we can't always make somebody do. You can put KPIs in front of them, you can do all the things, you can't make them care always, right? And they're going to try and get by anyway, right? So I guess, Keith, like, what do you think on that, right? Like, how do you deal in those situations where it's like, you already have this team in place, you know what I mean? What do you do with those guys?
Connor, you want to jump in first?
No,
You
that
can't.
comes right
You
at you.
can't.
Like you get, I'm not taking that. That's all you.
Sure. I mean, I just wanted to make sure I was making sure you felt included. I care about your presence
Yeah,
here.
Connor,
I'm
get
here to
out. You.
support
It's
Ruby
just
on
me
this
and Keith.
episode. Like I am just here to click buttons. That's my
Just
job.
So ultimately, I think the challenge is in many ways. So say, for example, it's like producing, I don't know, blog content or producing a process document or producing any of these things that are for other people in your organization. You almost want them to approach it as though like they own it. And it's the same with code, right? At the end of the day, a lot of people have been saying like, it's not like you can't use the excuse that the AI wrote the code because ultimately you're the one who submitted the PR. You're the one who contributed that back to the overall code base. And I think the same is measurable within the business environment. It's like you can't make them care, but you can hold them accountable for the business disruption that comes out of the work slop that they create, right? Like I think what is happening, and this is perhaps the real challenge that's happening in the industry at large, is there have been so many layoffs and a lot of companies are downsizing their workforce and they're expecting to get more from less. And so they expect you to be more productive by using AI tools. But as the Harvard Business Review indicated, or even MIT Sloan, when they had that like 95% of businesses trying to adopt AI or failing at their AI adoption practice. Well, a lot of that has to do with, first of all, there are no real like measurable outcomes, like no company sitting there and saying like, is this thing actually making us more productive? It's the CEO saying, again, Walmart being the example, thou shalt use AI without considering, okay, well, in what ways, as Ruby mentioned earlier, or
Mm-hmm.
to what end, and how are we measuring the quality of those outputs, and how are we measuring the productivity? And like any new skill, you're going to be slower at first, but 6 months, 8 months, 12 months on, you should be seeing outsized speed and like or velocity impacts within your business. And if you're not, you got to be asking yourself, like, is this thing adding the value that we thought it had? And did you do benchmarking all along? Because if you didn't, like you're in a worse spot overall.
Mm-hmm.
And I just sort of come back to like sometimes it really is like the person, really good example. This will hit with some people. Two astronauts in space, one's a Russian cosmonaut and one's an American. And the Russian American or the American holds the pen, is like writes on a piece of paper in space and like, I got a pen that writes in space. And the cosmonaut turns to him and goes, pencil. Like
Right.
sometimes it really is like a very simple thing that you don't need to optimize around. Like you can just do the simple process and be extremely effective without spending millions of dollars on Workslop. So
Mm-hmm.
figuring out where the right applicability is in your business and measuring the outputs and measuring the velocity of your business 3 to 6 to 9 months in to confirm that it's having the impacts you want is ultimately the responsibility of the CEO because they're responsible to the shareholder who is expecting them to be more productive.
Mm-hmm.
So my take on this moment is this. I think in corporate America, we have rewarded people for spending money on AI, and we have not rewarded them for the outcomes it's going to produce. I think the tide is turning slightly. We're just getting there. But we've had for the last 3 years this promise of we are going to solve problems in ways that we don't understand with technology that we don't understand. But if we just get on the bandwagon, life will be good. And I think that has been the energy in corporate America around a lot of boardrooms and a lot of senior leaders. And this has contributed to what I think has been a complete waste and of dollars, time, and created a lot of angst in a lot of the workforce. So here's an alternative. This goes back to what you were saying, Keith. If we had start with a particular process and say we have a particular outcome that we're trying to achieve, whether it's on the coding side, whether it's on the digital marketing side, whether it's like pick your thing, say, where was the outcome? What are you trying to drive? Then work backwards from outcome to initiation. And you're starting to build a process where you're thinking about where does AI come in this? Now, I believe most people, when they go through process design and they start documenting their process, they kind of go left to right. I start, I do stuff in the middle, and I have an end. And I would offer to anyone who's doing process systems process management or designing these things or helping doing business transformations, the right way to do this is actually start with the outcome. How are you going to measure the outcome? And then work backwards. And while you're doing it, you're thinking about guardrails. Because what you will find is that your process is probably terrible. And that as you go through this thoughtful rebuilding of the process with AI, it'll get simpler and it'll get faster. So if you can start with outcomes, measurements, have guardrails, and you're kind of constantly redefining both those two as you work backwards to the initiation of a process, that is the only way that you're really going to get a place where you can say, yes, we have intelligently integrated this new technology, this novel technology, because we didn't treat it like magic. We approached it like an architect. And that fundamental flip from being a magician to an architect is, I think, where we need to get to soon. Otherwise, we're going to have a bubble that's going to pop and it's going to hurt really bad.
Well said.
Also very existential.
Yes, on that cheerful note, why don't we talk about the last thing here? I wanted to get your input because we had a headline item run across news feeds. Yours truly did some LinkedIn influencer commentary on it, although I contributed nothing to the original research, and that is MCP security. So S is for the security and MCP. So let me tee it up for you guys. There was some research put out by Koi Security, and what they have found is the first documented instance of where an MCP server went from being a benign utility to being part of a malicious, was compromised and became malicious. And what was really interesting is the details behind this. Now, I'm not going to spoil anything. Keith, I'm actually going to hand this to you to do a lot of this setup here. But I just found this really as kind of a prescient moment. I thought this was the starting gun for us to a wake up call, probably a better way of looking at this, at the supply chain risks that we're introducing when you bring in MCP into your workflow. I've written out the idea of toxic flows, and that is where when you hook up an LLM through an MCP and you give it access to a resource, there is now identities, there are data flows, there's a lot happening there. And we are now just generally calling that toxic flows. And I've written about that because I think it's really important for security leaders to start educating their peer group on this new risk that has come up. It's not about the one thing, it's the one thing inside of the system that's showing up. So with that, Keith, I'm going to hand it over to you. Do you want to set the stage here a little bit about this MCP server that was good and then went ill, turned to the dark side, if you will?
Yeah, what's interesting about the situation is this is basically a situation of name squatting, as we've seen in other ecosystems like typo squatting with software bill of materials and packages, for example. But what I found interesting about the whole journey here is the name squatting element was from a seemingly like real French GitHub user, like their actual GitHub profile, real developer. So like the sniff test of like, is this potentially like DPRK creating something to steal the cryptocurrency? All of that just like goes by the wayside because the official Postmark MCP server was actually hosted by Postmark, but like they went and spun up basically a mirror of it. And then versions 1.0.0 to 1.0.15 were good. 1.0.16 suddenly adds a BCC line to send all of the Postmark emails going through that MCP server to a malicious account. And so at the end of the day, the real challenge was this was all server side on the MCP server. So if you're like YOLO connecting to MCP servers that are being hosted out there that you think are potentially legitimate and are functionally working the way that you would expect them to, and suddenly this changes behind the scenes on you, even if you're self-hosting and you're just like updating the version because you're an agent builder now at Walmart and you don't have good security hygiene practices to like understand how the tool is working. Well, guess what? Like you might miss that one change of the addition of a BCC line, which admittedly, like even our MCP context protector tool would have missed because we focus on prompt injections on the tool description and nothing in the tool descriptions changed here. It, in this case, looked like a legitimate MCP server written by a seemingly legitimate developer out on GitHub with a long-standing history of software development and looked to be a real human being, probably is, and then suddenly turns malicious. And so it's very much a, well, unless you're hosting your own MCP servers and you're versioning them and you're doing all the software bill of materials things that I hope you're now doing after the Shai Hulud or whatever the worm name was from the NPM problem, like hopefully now you've got a really good like software bill of materials practices, but guess what? Now it's not just for your developers, it's for everybody that's an agent builder in your ecosystem. Like your problem just became exponential potentially.
So there is this thing where like we need to stop treating, we need to take all the really good practices that we know we need to do in software security and supply chain security, and we just need to start doing them. And it's inconvenient and it is difficult to do, but it is really helpful. And if we look at this through the lens, I think it's through resiliency. So my point would be this: if we are going through an economy, we are moving from traditional technologies, deterministic technologies to an agentic business flows. We are rebuilding the entire digital economy that we're on slowly, one thing at a time. If you're going to be resilient in this moment, it's going to be through the lens of like building things thoughtfully. And part of that is going to have repositories for approved MCP servers. That is just one small step in this where you only say, if you are going to be in our environment, you're going to pull your MCP server from repositories that is owned by corporation X. We've pinned it, we've scanned it, we trust it. And we will let you know when the next thing. Same thing for packages with Shy Balloon. I want to we'll go down this path a little farther. We're going to talk about what your team at Trail of Bits had built. But what I thought was so interesting here was that this is another example of where the threat actor did not put in malicious code. They put in benign text with a malicious intent. And that's the war we're fighting. And that's the wrong language. But like, that's the moment that we find ourselves in as security leaders, is we've gone out of this world of like CVEs and malware and this stuff. They matter less. They don't not matter, but they matter less. We're seeing this new class of like any string of data can be malicious. And it's just mind boggling when you really look at trying to build resiliency across an enterprise and you realize every single line of text has the potential to be malicious. It is an entirely different game on how you build a resiliency or security strategy if you adopt that, like the data is the enemy. The data is the artifact by which the threat actor will exploit your systems. So no hope, by the way, no ray of sunshine. And I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's a pretty terrible spot to be in.
This is kind of where, from a market perspective, is where like the AI governance roles are coming through, right? And a lot of these types of skill sets are not defined. You are not a security engineer anymore, right? Like they're coming through from all different types of backgrounds and levelings, right? And that's also really difficult, right? We're asking people to attack problems that they don't really know how to do. I hire people all the time where it's like, we think that we have the fundamentals to have this person basically deal with it, but they're not super sure, right? I think we're all in this place of fear and it's really hard to get out of that spot. We are in the fight or flight mode, right? A lot of people are choosing flight, honestly, when it comes to just like, we're just going to lay off people and put a lot of faith into this, or they're putting fight and they're investing in security, right? And so it depends on what side of the war that you do want to be on. I don't think, honestly, too, that's an aggressive word to use, because I think in some situations, right, like it can be life or death for some people, right? In the extreme of the extreme, right? When we do a lot of work with the DoD and things like that, this is where this starts. Eventually it will get there. And that's kind of where I'm the most concerned. Again, rainbows and butterflies, but there we go.
So Keith, I wanted to walk through what your team had built here. And I didn't want to leave today's conversation without taking a moment to really just anchor onto the MCP layer of security that your team had built here. So let me just throw it up on the screen and I want to walk everyone through it. I think this is really important because we are in this moment again, we're rebuilding LLMs and MCP, and MCP is the principal protocol for connecting an LLM to a data store or a system by which to take action. And there are concepts here, like when you have an MCP, how does it connect? Well, you need the network. That's the network protocol, but you have an identity that's at play here. You have text descriptors that are going through. Remember, LLMs, for the broader audience, can't tell the difference between if it's the request or a system command, a prompt request or a system command. It's all the same, it's all in the same context window. So we have this really vulnerable protocol is being layered into a lot of really important processes. And we're not even a year old on the MCP protocol. And so it really is early, and the adoption's been pretty aggressive, and it's been adopted without any real fundamental safeguards. Fundamental meaning like, if you ask for a thing, you get that thing, not you ask for a thing and your whole system is compromised, backdoored, and your data went to left field, which does happen. With that, Keith, I thought what your team had built here, I just want to pull up the image here. I thought was really cool, this model MCP context protector, and how your team has built it allows it to natively plug into anyone who's using MCP today. My understanding is the way the technology works is it works like a proxy where your LLM would hit it, and it would then go to the MCP server, and then the MCP server would take its action. So A, correct me if I'm wrong, but B, Give us a little more context, and then we can talk about the implications of this technology.
Yeah, and for those not watching the video as well, you can also go out to trailofbits.com/MCP, and we also have like a site that walks through some of this as well, which has some further like how to install it and what have you. But high level, it's an MCP server itself. So like fun fact, we're actually using an MCP server to perform some of these actions for MCP like wrapping calls. But the intention here was to provide a layer to do validation of tool descriptions when you make your first connection out to a new MCP server. Because those tool descriptions could have a prompt injection in them, which your LLM is going to have to read in order to understand how to actually use that MCP server. And so that led us to calling the attack technique line jumping, because we thought of like a bouncer with like the silk rope outside of, a club, and you got all these people in line. Well, guess what? You're just like totally jumping the line because your tool description is the prompt injection, and it's going to read that first. So that leads to a whole host of downstream impacts. And that's like the first thing that we focus on is, hey, let's like validate first and foremost that there is no prompt injections in the tool description. But then also the other thing that I think is really important is tool descriptions will change over time as version updates, new functionality, what have you, gets introduced to an MCP server that you're connecting to. Well, you also want to basically have this check or a pin for the current version. So when it changes, revalidate with the human that's connecting via their LLM to this MCP server that this is in fact still something that you want to connect to. Like the tool description is not introducing new prompt injection attacks. It doesn't have hidden like zero width characters in it. And then the other thing as well that we showed as part of our research was anti-terminal codes. So those can hide malicious text. They can hide instructions from the user so that like everything looks totally good when you're reading it inside your terminal. But guess what? No, there's actually like prompt injections being hidden inside the tool description that way instead. So we built it with the ability to also connect it up to guardrails tools like Nemo guardrails from NVIDIA, as well as Llama Firewall from Meta, so that you can add that additional like prompt injection protection mechanisms on top of everything that we've done as well. And then sort of the nice like final piece is it will like, go ahead and look at calls being passed back and forth between the LLM and the MCP server. And if it recognizes that something looks a little bit sus, it'll like put it out in a quarantine and wait for you to come back and like validate that that's an action that you want to take, because it looks at that action as like, this doesn't seem right to me as the high level. So it's an MCP server itself. It's effectively a wrapper. I think that, or a proxy is a great way to think of it. And it acts as a way in which you can like put a little bit of a middle layer between yourself and other MCP servers you're connecting out to. So this is good in some respects because, hey, tool descriptions are an attack vector and you got to worry about them. Not fully perfect or comprehensive, because if the actual underlying tool functionality, like in the Postmark MCP server, changes, well, we wouldn't detect for that because we're not scanning that too. But again, there's like this move as an MVP in our case, like we're trying to give the world an example of one way in which you can start to protect against some of these problems. And here's like a comprehensive way to do that. But still more to go. We've released it as a beta. We continue to plan out how we want to make investments in this and extend it further. So far, the way that we think of it is, hey, you need manual approvals for updates, automatic tool description validation. You want to make sure that configuration changes aren't going to be something that introduces some sort of badness into your ecosystem, plus content filtering, integrations with various, guardrails tools that are pretty popular, and then catching all of like the things that are going to easily bypass the human filter, such as the anti-terminal codes. Because if it's not there on your screen and you're not reading it, but it's a prompt injection, well, you're still vulnerable. So you sort of have to call those out and filter those back out for the user to see them.
So on the ANSI terminal calls for just a quick second. So as we get ready to move to our rapid fire Monday morning quarterback, I think in a second, I just want to say, a couple of years ago, I was talking with the general counsel of an organization, and I was explaining the fact that like, hey, if you have white text on a white document, that's one font or 1 point font, like that's going to be a problem in this world. And he kind of looked at me quizzically and said, what? And I said, imagine a world where your contract management system is going to use an MCP connector and pull the data store. All it's going to happen is your contracts team is going to take those contracts, they're going to put them somewhere, the AI is going to read it, and then it's going to give you back the lawyer and say, this is what needs your attention, this is fine, move forward. Well, if you do what you're describing there, say take white text on a white background and make it a small font so humans don't see it, as you go through the system, it's still text, it's still going to get processed, and those instructions are still going to be honored. unless you have guardrails in place. So the text may simply say, skip over paragraph 3, because that's where the contract, language is favorable to the counterparty and not to you. And so there is this real risk, and we often think about it from this purely cyber technical risk, where someone is putting in some like malicious code where they're going to do a thing. But this can start to make its way into business processes as well. And it's just this whole shift of the world that we're in, that like the data is where the danger is fascinating. What a great industry to be a part of. And it was wonderful to be part of the team that's coming up with the solutions for this.
One last thing as well, it gets wilder because as we recently released with a tool called Anamorpher, you can also hide prompt injections inside of images that at the scale that you're looking at them as a human look totally fine. But when they get downscaled and sent to a large language model, it changes the background color to a reddish font and then adds the prompt injection text onto the image. So looks, feels, reads totally benign as a human, but then suddenly the LLM is seeing something different than you as the human are seeing. So yeah, we live in a very wild, interesting times at this point when it comes to just like
it's
creativity.
wrong. This is like the next generation of steganography, right? It's just like, how can we trick the human eye to get what we need to get done with this? I had not read this from you guys. This is pretty amazing. I will definitely go check this out.
More for your listeners to chomp on. Maybe a future conversation we'll discuss a little bit further. But we also released a tool called Anamorpher that actually allows anyone to basically build very similar images with prompt injections in them for multimodal models. So knock yourselves out.
All right. So with that, we're going to pause here. We could go on for a very long time. So thank you, Keith. So before we let you go, though, I want to hear from the three of us ringing around the horn. And what is the one piece of actionable advice that you would give a CISO or a security leader that they should be starting on Monday, right? This episode is going to come out on Friday. They'll be listening over the weekend. They'll be deeply contemplating the truths of life while they're listening to this. And on Monday, they're going to get going. What should they do? What actions do you recommend? Ruby, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Keith.
Okay. So if you're a CISO who's scared of what's happening with AI and you're in flight mode, quit it and ask for help. I think people as a CISO, I think there are a few out there who I've met who are scared to ask for help. You're screwed. You're screwed. If you don't know where to start and you're not willing to ask, hey, I need to go bring in a consultant for this. I need to bring someone in who's smarter than me. You have to be that person. And if you're a CISO who's on board and you're modern and you're trying to pick up people who are constantly better and you know the value of that talent, I would reassess your hiring scorecards and make sure your recruiters are knowledgeable in terms of what they're trying to accomplish in that, right? They need to be in the loop as well. So I would say, again, CISOs, if you're afraid, if you're in that mode, figure it out, ask for help. And if you're on the same page and you're gung-ho, make sure that you're assessing it the right way as well. So that way candidates are also seeing that from you from the hiring process.
Love that. Amazing. Keith.
You're going to need a bigger boat. And by which I mean, you're going to need to go hire more talent, right? Like at this point, especially if you're Walmart and you've got like, this agentic focus, or you're driving more people to be able to do these, agent builder scenarios, you're going to need more bodies that are knowledgeable in the ways in which LLMs can introduce risk to your business, so that you can build processes, you can build structure, you can build ecosystems, you can build checks, you can build guardrails. And by the way, all the things that you build need to be maintained, which is often one of those things that a lot of people forget about. Yeah, it's like you built the thing and you sort of need to continue to iterate because it gets stale quickly. So yeah, if I'm giving a recommendation to a CISO come Monday morning and you've got someone that's saying, hey, we're going to go all in on this agent builder mentality with our new hires, ask for more headcount.
So mine will be this, but I'm actually saying it to myself. So I'm using this moment to talk to myself here. Invest 10% into yourself. And by that, I mean, if you have a 40-hour work week, you should have 4 hours of your time above and beyond that, which is investing in yourself. Is Ruby what you said? It's about educating yourself, get yourself out of flight mode and into fight mode, engage, lean in, dig in. Keith is what you recommended earlier. It's go to trailofbiz.com/MCP and start. Just download, start doing these things. And I think that is it. 4 hours a week, every single week. Just keep moving forward and invest in yourself with a 10%. All right. So with that is our show for this week. Keith, thank you for joining us. Keith Hoodlet is the engineering director at Trail of Bits, former cloud security architect at GitHub, and the winner of the DoD's inaugural AI bias bounty. and he's helping shape how we secure developers' AI agents and the systems that they power. To hear our full conversation that we recorded at Black Hat, please watch the show, join in the discussion. And until next time, Keith, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me again. Hopefully I'll be on again soon to be the representative bald guy in Stu's absence.